The rain came down hard on Columbus that Tuesday morning. The kind of cold November rain that made everything feel like it was already over before it started. Cole Hargrove sat in a black SUV outside a glass tower on 5th Street, engine running, heat on low. He had $17 in his checking account, a 7-year-old daughter at home waiting for him to come back, and a new job he'd had for exactly one morning. Diana Marsh had already fired the last 3 drivers in 4 weeks. Nobody at the staffing agency had warned him clearly enough. They'd mentioned she was demanding. They'd said she had high standards. What they hadn't said, what the 3-page briefing document had only hinted at, was that Diana Marsh, CEO of Marsh Digital, was a woman who had built one of the fastest-growing software companies in Ohio from nothing, had done it entirely on her own terms, and had absolutely no intention of letting a paralysis diagnosis slow that down, or letting anyone close enough to watch her struggle with it. Cole didn't know any of that yet. He only knew the heat was on, the rain was coming down, and the lobby doors were about to open. What happened in the next 11 weeks would change both of their lives in ways neither of them had room to expect. If this story is already pulling at something in you, hit like and tell me what city or town you're watching from. I read every single one. Now settle in. This one matters. Cole had taken the driving job because there were no other options left. That was the plain truth of it, and he had learned over 3 years of difficult truths that plain was better than decorated. 18 months before he ever pulled that black SUV onto 5th Street, he had been a project manager for a mid-sized construction firm in Columbus. He oversaw builds worth $7 and $8 million. He managed teams of 30 people, ran timelines the way some people ran marathons, through will and preparation, and the firm refusal to accept that something couldn't be done on schedule. He had been good at the job. Better than good. He had a track record, and a reputation, and a salary that let him set aside money every month into an account he and his late wife Rachel had opened together the year they got married, which they called, with no irony whatsoever, the Someday Fund. Then the firm had folded. A bad investment by the parent company. A few months of warning signs that management had quietly chosen to ignore, and then a Friday afternoon email that said effective immediately, and thanked everyone for their service, which was the corporate way of saying they were sorry it had come to this, and they were not going to be in the room when it did. 300 people, out of work, in the time it took to read 6 paragraphs. Cole had spent 6 months trying to find a comparable position. He had interviewed in Cincinnati. He had driven to Cleveland twice and Pittsburgh once. He had rewritten his resume 4 times, each time stripping away another layer of what he thought sounded impressive, and replacing it with what was simply true, on the theory that somewhere out there was someone who hired people for what they actually were. He had called every professional contact he had. He had sat through 11 interviews and received 9 polite rejections, and 2 that didn't even bother being polite. His daughter Lily was 6 during those months. She ate cereal for dinner twice a week and didn't complain about it, which was somehow worse than if she had complained. She was the kind of child who understood, without being told, that some things required quiet, and she was quiet about the cereal the way she was quiet about a lot of things, not because she didn't notice, but because she had already, at 6, developed a sense of what was worth saying out loud, and what was better carried in private. Cole had taken temporary work, delivery driving through 2 particularly cold months, weekend warehouse shifts that left his back sore in a way it hadn't been since his 20s. A brief and thoroughly miserable 2 weeks doing data entry for a dental supply company, sitting at a folding table in a back office, entering part numbers into a spreadsheet while the fluorescent light above him flickered at a frequency that was technically legal and practically maddening. None of it added up to enough. The Someday Fund was becoming the Right Now Fund, and then the This Week Fund, and then, by the time he called the staffing agency that specialized in executive transport, something he didn't have a name for because there was no longer enough of it to name. He had also been doing it without Rachel for 3 years, which was its own weight, carried alongside the other weights, not in place of them. Rachel had died in January, when Lily was 4. The cancer had moved faster than the doctors had anticipated in those last months, and the final weeks had been both very long and somehow impossibly compressed. The way time worked in hospital rooms when the person inside them was someone you had organized your entire life around. Cole had spent those weeks in the particular state of being completely present and completely unable to do anything useful, which was the hardest kind of being present he'd ever experienced. He did not talk about it much. He had learned early on that grief was something most people wanted you to be finished with on a schedule that suited their own comfort, and he had gotten good at carrying it in places where it didn't show. In the way he made Lily's lunches, always with exactly one thing Rachel would have included, because Rachel had believed strongly in lunch as a communication. In the way he drove home from wherever he was each evening slightly slower than necessary, giving himself the 10 minutes between the day and the apartment that Rachel used to give him by being already there when he arrived, which had been its own kind of decompression that he now had to manufacture himself. The carved wooden sparrow on his dresser was the most visible piece of her that remained in the apartment. She'd bought it at a craft fair their second year together, from an artist who worked in birchwood, and given it to him with no ceremony whatsoever. Just "I saw this and thought of you," which was Rachel's way of saying she loved him without making anything larger than it needed to be. He had kept it on his dresser through every apartment and house they'd shared, and now it lived on the nightstand, and he moved it to the dashboard when he was driving somewhere new, because it was a habit he'd stopped questioning. He put it on the dashboard of the agency's black SUV, the morning of his first Diana Marsh assignment. He had read the briefing document 3 times. Page 1 was logistics, the building, the garage entrance, the wheelchair ramp protocol, the usual sequence of stops, 5th Street office, the PT clinic on Wednesdays, the coffee shop on Broad Street on some Friday afternoons. Page 2 was preferences, room temperature still water in the cup holder, music off unless requested, no comments on traffic, no personal phone calls taken in the vehicle, no conversation unless she initiated it. He had read both pages carefully and thought they were reasonable. Page 3 was the part that made him pause. It listed the previous 3 drivers and their reasons for termination. He read the entries twice, slowly. The first had offered to help her into the building. Fired the same day. The second had asked, during a longer trip to a client office in Dublin, Ohio, whether she was comfortable. He had lasted 4 more days before the agency received the call saying he wasn't working out. The third had held the lobby door for her, a small instinctive gesture, the kind anyone might make without thinking, and had been dismissed before he made it back to the car. Cole had sat with that for a while. Then he'd driven to the 5th Street Tower and parked in the right spot and sat in the rain and waited. And at 7:52 Diana Marsh had come through the lobby doors. She moved with a precision that Cole noticed immediately. Not the hesitation or the careful negotiation of space he'd braced himself not to notice, but something efficient and deliberate. Her hands working the wheelchair with the ease of someone who had made a complete and final peace with the mechanics of it, and was focused entirely on where they were going. She was wearing a dark gray coat, tailored, the kind that meant exactly what it was meant to mean. Her hair was pulled back. Her face, as Cole saw it for the first time through the rain-blurred windshield, was the face of someone who had decided what this morning was going to be before it started, and was simply executing the decision. He did not get out to help her. He did not rush to the back door. He did not do anything that communicated that her approach to the vehicle was a special event requiring special management. He got out of the driver's side in one motion, walked to the rear, and had the door open before she reached the vehicle. The wheelchair ramp was operated by an exterior panel button that he had tested twice in the parking garage before pulling around. He pressed it, stepped back to give her the full width of the ramp, and stood where he would be visible without being in the way. She moved up the ramp and positioned herself in the rear of the vehicle. He retracted the ramp, closed the door, was back in the driver's seat in under 40 seconds. She didn't comment on the transition. She didn't say anything at all for a full 3 minutes. "You're new," she said finally. "Yes. Don't call me ma'am." "Understood." He pulled onto 5th Street. The radio was off. The water was in the cup holder, still, Room temperature. He had double-checked the temperature by opening the bottle briefly in the parking garage and holding his palm around it. Room temperature was a specific thing, not a rough estimate. 3 minutes into the drive, she said, "The light is about to change." The light was green. "It's green," he said. Silence. 20 seconds later, it turned yellow as they crossed the intersection. She didn't point that out. He didn't say anything either. "Speed trap at the corner of Broad and Grant," she said. He'd already eased off the gas. The police car had been parked nose out a half-block back, standard morning enforcement positioning, visible for anyone who'd driven that corridor enough times to know where to look. He'd seen it before she finished the sentence. He pulled up in front of Marsh Digital at 8:04. The briefing document had estimated 14 minutes. It had been 12, including the light cycle on 5th. She didn't mention the time. "I'll be out at 6:30, she said. And the door opened. And she was gone. Cole sat in front of the building in the rain and watched the lobby doors close behind her. He thought about the $17. Then, he put the SUV in drive. The first 2 weeks were like that. Exact, professional, and almost completely silent. Diana Marsh did not make small talk. She did not ask about his life or offer information about hers beyond the logistical, a schedule change here, a revised pickup time there, delivered in the same tone she might use for a route update. What she did, he began to understand, was watch. He caught it in the rearview mirror, the way her eyes tracked his hands on the wheel when he merged, the way she went very still when he braked harder than usual, not frightened exactly, just assessing. Taking readings. She was evaluating him constantly. Every drive was an ongoing test, and the test had almost nothing to do with driving. It was about whether he was going to modify his behavior because of her, whether he was going to treat her presence as something requiring special management, whether he was going to look at her the way people looked at things they were being careful around. He wasn't. He drove the way he'd always driven, with competence and efficiency, and the particular quality of quiet that came from being someone who didn't need to fill silence in order to feel comfortable in it. He didn't linger on the loading process. He didn't check in about the temperature. He made his route decisions without announcing them and corrected errors without explaining them, and arrived where he was supposed to arrive at the time he was supposed to arrive, and that was the entirety of his performance. On day 11, something changed slightly. They were heading to the PT clinic on a Wednesday, and traffic on 71 North was backed up from an accident, 2 exits ahead. The GPS was rerouting them through a residential grid that Cole already knew, from 3 years of driving those streets for various jobs, was going to add more time than it saved. He had already turned off the GPS suggestion and was taking a parallel route north of the highway before she said anything. "You ignored the reroute," she said. "The GPS puts us in a school bus queue on Elm, between 3:15 and 3:40. Today is Wednesday. We'd arrive at 3:22. A pause. "You know the school schedule. Westmore Elementary. I picked up at that school for 2 years when I was doing delivery work. The bus queue backs up 4 blocks on Wednesday afternoons." Another pause, longer. "Your appointment is at 3:30, he added. "We'll make it." They arrived at 3:26. She had 4 minutes. She said nothing as she got out. The next morning, when Cole checked the briefing document that the agency kept updated in his client portal, he found a single line had been added to the preferences section. Route decisions at driver's discretion. He noticed it. He didn't mention it. He drove. He was beginning to understand the shape of Diana Marsh's standards. She was not cruel the way certain powerful people were cruel, performatively, arbitrarily, as a demonstration of the distance between themselves and everyone else. She was hard. There was a real difference. Hard meant her expectations were genuine. It meant she was asking from him exactly what she asked from everyone in her professional orbit. Competence executed without theater. Work done without requiring an audience for the effort. She had no use for visible trying. She cared only about results. He could work with that. He'd spent 7 years working with exactly that. What he didn't know yet was what she had been before she'd been made this precise. What the original shape had looked like, Before the accident. Before whatever the accident had done not just to her body but to the armor she'd built around what remained. He didn't ask. But on day 18, stopped at a long light on Broad, he caught her looking at the carved sparrow on his dashboard. A quick glance, then away, as if she'd already calculated that he'd seen it, and decided that looking longer would require acknowledgement she wasn't offering. He didn't say anything about it. But he filed it away the way he filed most things. In a place he could retrieve later, when retrieval became necessary. The job was harder than it looked. And it didn't look easy. Not because of Diana. Not only because of Diana. It was the architecture of the work that was hard. The early mornings, the unpredictable late pickups, the schedule that could stretch to 9 or 10 at night when she had board dinners or investor calls that ran past their allotted time. The agency contract specified up to 12 hours per day, with overtime for anything beyond. And the overtime happened twice a week on average. Cole's neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, watched Lily on the late nights. And Lily was good about it. She liked Mrs. Patterson, who had a dog named Admiral, and a television that received channels Lily found interesting, and a general policy of bedtime being a suggestion. But there were nights when Cole drove home at 10 and sat in the parking lot of his building for a few minutes before going up. Because sometimes you needed the gap between the day and the apartment to just be a gap. He managed it systematically. That was his method for most things. Build the system. Trust the system. Only rebuild the system when it failed. He prepped meals on Sundays, enough for most of the week. He had a pickup arrangement with another parent in Lily's class for the days he couldn't get to the school in time. He kept a detailed shared calendar with Mrs. Patterson that specified every possible variation of the week so that nobody had to call him unless something unusual happened. The agency had called the system excessive in the initial intake interview. Cole had thanked them for the feedback. He was, by week 4, no longer worried about the job in the basic financial sense. The pay was good. Better than most things he'd done since the construction firm closed. Better, if he was honest, than the construction job itself, which had come with stress and prestige, but not with the overtime rate that executive driving offered. The someday fund was slowly becoming something again. Not fast, but moving in the right direction, which was a kind of progress he'd learned to appreciate without requiring it to be dramatic. Diana Marsh, 4 weeks in, remained a largely closed question. He knew the professional outline: Marsh Digital, software infrastructure, 400 employees, 200 active clients, 8 years of growth that had apparently been sustained through sheer will and precision, and the particular kind of business intelligence that looked like risk tolerance from the outside, but was actually extremely thorough preparation. He knew this from the agency briefing, and from 2 business articles he'd read during long waits in parking lots. He was a person who believed in knowing who he worked for. He knew the shape of her days: early start, back-to-back meetings, occasional external visits to client sites or investor meetings, 1 or 2 longer trips per week, the PT clinic on Wednesdays without fail, the Friday afternoon coffee shop perhaps once every 2 weeks. He knew her preferences in the car with a precision that had come from 6 weeks of observation. The water temperature. The silence. The way she worked on her laptop in the back on longer drives, with a focused quiet that made the vehicle feel like an extension of her office. He knew what had happened 2 years ago only because his neighbor had forwarded him an article. He hadn't sought it out himself. He hadn't felt it was his business to research her personal history any further than what the agency had told him. But the article had arrived, and he'd read it, and he'd sat with it for a while before going to work the next morning. The accident had been on a highway, 2 winters ago. Black ice, a truck that jackknifed across 2 lanes. Her company car catching the barrier at an angle the article described carefully, without ever making the description feel adequate. The driver, a man named Gus, who had worked for her for 4 years, had escaped without serious injury. Diana had not. The spinal injury had been classified quickly, and in terms the article handled with precision, because precision was kinder than euphemism. Permanent. At the lumbar level, the medical description followed by the human translation, which was the wheelchair, which was the daily logistics, which was the briefing document, and the 3 fired drivers, and the single line about route decisions at driver's discretion. Cole had read it and put his phone down and thought about it. Then he'd driven to work the next morning and said nothing, because there was nothing to say that she hadn't already lived, and nothing he knew about her situation that she didn't know better. But the briefing document made more sense after that. The fired driver who had offered to help her into the building. He'd meant well. And what he'd done was make the physical difficulty the central event of the moment, instead of the destination they were trying to reach. The one who had asked if she was comfortable. He'd meant well too. And what he'd done was remind her, in the middle of an ordinary day, that her comfort was a question worth raising, which implied it was something in doubt, which was not what she needed from the people around her. They needed, Cole understood, to simply do their jobs and let her do hers. The small shifts came gradually, spread across weeks, almost invisible until you collected them. Week 5, Lily called the work phone during an evening trip to a corporate dinner. Diana said take it without hesitation, went back to her phone, and when Cole ended the call 2 minutes later, she didn't ask what had happened. She waited. Then she said, quietly, "How old?" 7. He said. Just her? Just her. Nothing else. But the quality of the silence for the rest of the trip was slightly different. Not warmer, exactly, just less sealed. He drove her home at 10:40 that night, and drove to Lily, who was asleep with Mrs. Patterson's dog inexplicably inside the apartment, curled at the foot of her bed. Cole carried Lily to her room, returned the dog, and stood in his daughter's doorway for a moment. Then he went to his room and sat on the edge of the bed, and looked at the sparrow on the nightstand, and thought about small moments that added up to something without ever announcing themselves. Week 6. The coffee shop on Broad Street. The first Friday he'd taken her there, and the adjustment she made without being asked. She told him to wait out front instead of the back lot. Practical, she said. Visibility was better. When she came out 40 minutes later, she was carrying 2 cups. She set one on the center console. Room temperature, she said. Still, he looked at it. Then in the rear view, she was looking at her phone. He took the coffee. He didn't say thank you. He understood, without reasoning it out, that making it into a moment would collapse it. He drove, but it was the first time she had brought him anything. Week 8. The PT clinic on a Wednesday, when the parking lot was full, and he'd walked through the lobby to use the restroom, and through the glass panel to the therapy rooms he'd seen. Briefly, without meaning to, without lingering, Diana working. The physical therapist guiding her through something that required everything she had. Her face, visible for 4 seconds before he looked away, was the face of someone fighting something that was not giving way. He went back to the car. He sat. When she came out 50 minutes later, she was composed. Coat on, expression level, the armor fully reconstructed. He drove her home without saying a word about it. But he thought about it on the drive. He thought about Rachel in the hospital, the weeks when she'd been working harder than anyone around her to maintain the version of herself she wanted people to experience. The way she'd insisted on doing her own hair in the mornings, even when it cost her something. The way she'd made jokes in the treatment room until the nurses laughed, and then quietly cried in the car on the way home, where Cole was the only audience, which was how she'd needed it. Effort that looked like dignity from the outside. The same material, arranged differently. He touched the sparrow on the dashboard when he pulled into his parking lot that night. Not for any reason, just the habit of it. Lily asked him about it at dinner the following Saturday. "Why do you keep a bird on your dashboard?" She asked it the way she asked most things. Directly, from genuine curiosity, without the social scaffolding that adults built around questions they thought might be too much. "Your mom gave it to me," he said. Lily was quiet for a moment. She processed information about Rachel the same way she processed information about everything that mattered, at her own pace, without being hurried. "Does it help?" she asked. He thought about it honestly. Yeah, he said. It does. Lily nodded. I keep her bracelet in my backpack, she said. For the same reason, I think. Cole looked at his daughter across the kitchen table in the lamplight of a Saturday evening. She was 7 years old with his jaw and Rachel's eyes, and her own entire interior world that he was sometimes allowed to see and sometimes not. Yeah, he said. Same reason. They ate. He read her the bird book until she fell asleep. He sat at the kitchen table afterward with a cup of coffee that had gone cold and thought about the things that got you through, the carved birds, and the bracelets, and the specific habit of continuing, which was not the same as being fine, but was the only other available option. On the 9th week's Thursday, on the way back from a late client dinner, Diana said something that didn't sound like a report or a logistics update. You've been doing this job for 9 weeks, she said. Yes. You haven't asked me anything personal. No, a pause. The others did. Eventually they all did, in different ways. She wasn't looking at him. She was looking out the window at the Columbus night, the downtown lights giving way to the quieter streets of her neighborhood. One of them asked me what it was like. Another one asked if I thought I'd ever walk again. Cole kept his eyes on the road. What did you say? He asked. Nothing, she said. I called the agency the next morning. He drove. The heater hummed. The night was clear and cold. I'm not going to ask you those things, he said. I know, she said. I don't need to know them to do my job. A long pause. That's the first time anyone said that to me, she said. In exactly those words. He pulled up to her building. She didn't get out immediately, which she rarely did anymore. The immediate departure had stopped somewhere around week 5. Now there was usually a pause. Sometimes brief, sometimes not. Good night, Cole, she said. It was the first time she'd used his name. Good night, he said. She went inside. He sat with the engine running for a moment and thought about what it meant when someone trusted you with their name. Not the professional name, not the Ms. Marsh, just the name. He drove home. The next morning, she had hot tea waiting on the lobby bench beside her. 2 cups again, one of which she held out to him when he opened the door. Still no ceremony. Just the act. He took it. He drove. Something was shifting. Neither of them named it. The threat came in the 10th week. Cole was in the parking garage of Marsh Digital on a Tuesday morning, windows down slightly to let in the cool air, working through a call with Lily's school about an upcoming field trip, when he heard footsteps on the concrete. A man came through the stairwell door and walked directly toward the SUV, with the particular purposefulness of someone who had pre-decided what this conversation was going to be, and wanted it done before the elevator came back down. He was in his mid-50s, the kind of fit that came from consistent access to good gyms and enough money to make health a priority, in the deliberate way it became when it was optional, rather than simply a result of physical labor. His suit was charcoal, his shoes were polished, and he knocked on the driver's side window with his knuckle rather than his palm, which was a choice that communicated something about how he thought about his own presence in spaces. Cole ended the school call and lowered the window. You're Hargrove? The man said. I am. Richard Vance. Board of Directors. He said it the way people said things they expected to rearrange the room. I need a few minutes regarding Miss Marsh. Cole waited. He had learned from years of managing construction teams that the way to get accurate information from someone who had an agenda was to give them nothing to react to. No nods, no expressions of interest, no encouragement. Just quiet, patient space. The board, Vance said, has some concerns about her workload. She's been pushing very hard since the accident, and we've seen signs, general signs, of strain, fatigue, occasional missed communications. We think it may be time to revisit the structure of her schedule. He paused. It would be genuinely helpful to us if you could share observations, general, informal, about what you noticed during your time with her. Times when she seems overextended. Appointments that seem to cost her more than they should. Anything that might help us understand her current capacity. He delivered it smoothly, in the tone of someone who had practiced framing concern as care. You'd be well compensated for that kind of additional support. Cole looked at him. He thought about the glass panel at the PT clinic. He thought about Diana's face through it, not defeated, not struggling in the way Vance's framing implied, but exerting, working, the way people worked when they were fighting towards something they meant to reach. He thought about what Vance was actually asking, for someone who had been trusted with proximity to turn that proximity into surveillance. No, Cole said. Flatly, not with hostility, the same tone he used on job sites when a subcontractor suggested a shortcut that would compromise the structure. Vance held his expression for a moment. Then the smoothness shifted into something slightly cooler. Think about it, he said. The compensation would be... I've thought about it, Cole said. No. Vance looked at him for a beat. Something moved behind his eyes that was not quite surprise. More like recalculation. Then, he went back to the stairwell. Cole put the window up. He sat with his hands on the wheel and thought about what had just happened with the methodical care he gave to things that mattered. Someone on Diana's board had come to her driver, in a parking garage, at 7:40 in the morning, and offered him money to report on her condition. That was not concern. That was the beginning of a case being built against someone, and the case was going to use her physical reality as its evidence. He did not tell Diana that morning. He held it for 2 days, thinking about whether and how. On Thursday evening, on the way home from a late client site in Westerville, he said it plainly. Richard Vance spoke to me in the parking garage on Tuesday. He offered me money to report back to him about your condition. His word was strain. Whether you seemed overextended. The back of the SUV went very still. And you said? She said. No. A long pause. He's been building something for months, she said. Not to Cole exactly. More to herself, confirming an equation she'd already been working. A restructuring proposal. A reduction of my operational authority, framed as a health consideration. He's been gathering support on the board quietly since last year. He needed an inside account to corroborate the narrative he's constructing. She paused. He tried to use my driver. He picked the wrong person, Cole said. She was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, there was something different in her voice. Not softer, but less managed. I know, she said. I know he did. They drove in silence for a while. The Columbus streets at 9 p.m. were quiet, the night clear, the first real cold of November settling in for good. His name before mine was Gus, she said suddenly. It took Cole a moment to connect it, the previous driver. The article. I know, he said. He worked for me for 4 years. He sent a card to the hospital. She paused. I never answered it. Not because I didn't want to. Because in those first weeks, every communication was. She stopped. Tried again. I couldn't manage responses to people who had seen the accident. Not then. I was too busy managing what my face did when I thought about it. Another pause. I should have answered the card. You probably should have, Cole said without softening it. She didn't respond to that immediately. Then, you're very direct. Is that a problem? No, she said. No, it's not. They drove. I handled the recovery badly, she said. It came out the way things came out when they'd been held in one position for a long time and finally moved. Not easily, but inevitably. I went back to work 4 months after the accident. Everyone thought it was too soon. My therapist, my board, my 2 closest colleagues. They were all right, and I went back anyway because I didn't know what I was if I wasn't working. Because the company was the proof. The evidence that I was worth something that nobody could dismiss. She looked at her hands, and the board had been quietly uncertain about me for years before the accident. A 32-year-old CEO without a co-founder, building on a financial runway that required everything to go right for several years in a row. They accepted that risk when the numbers made it unavoidable. When the numbers got complicated in the quarter after the accident. Supply chain problems that had nothing to do with me, a bad market period that hit the whole sector, the uncertainty became useful. It became a reason rather than just a feeling. Cole said nothing. He understood that she was telling him something she hadn't told anyone in a very long time, possibly not at all, and that the thing she needed him to do was listen without directing. Richard Vance said something to an industry contact 2 years ago. She said. That I was not, his phrase was, conventionally credible. That the company's long-term viability required a CEO whose presence commanded a room without qualification. He said it to someone in the industry who told someone who told my PR director who told me. She paused. Conventionally credible, as if there's a body type that credibility requires. He's wrong, Cole said. She didn't respond immediately. You added 7 clients in the last quarter, he said. I read the release. The numbers aren't complicated anymore. She looked at him in the rear view. You read our press releases. I drive you 12 times a week. I'd rather know who I'm working for. She was quiet. He could hear her processing it, not the information, which she already had, but the fact that he had sought it out, that it had mattered to him to know. I don't talk about this, she said finally, with anyone. I know. I'm not sure why I'm saying it to you. He thought about it carefully before answering. Maybe because I drive you in one direction, and it goes somewhere, and I drive you back and I never use any of it for anything. Maybe that's the kind of person you can say things to. A long silence. Out the window, the city moved through the night. Lit, and purposeful, and entirely indifferent. It was a Tuesday, she said. And her voice was different now. Quieter, stripped of the cadence she used for professional statements. I was coming back from a site visit for a client in Hilliard. We were on 70 West, past the Grandview exit, and the truck came across from the left lane. 2 lanes. Gus didn't have anywhere to go. The impact was on the passenger side. Cole drove. I remember the sound more than anything else, and the movement. The way the car moved that wasn't like anything a car was supposed to do. And then I remember waking up, and the first thing I did was say Gus's name. He held his breath. They told me he was fine. And then they told me about the spinal injury. And she stopped. I spent about 48 hours being someone I didn't recognize. Not brave, not strategic, just frightened in a way that didn't have a shape or a solution. Frightened that the thing I had spent 8 years building, the credibility, the take her seriously because she demands it, the room that changes when you walk into it, that it was gone. That they would look at me and see something to manage rather than someone who ran things. Cole was quiet for a long time. And then I decided, she said, that I was not going to be that. I decided it the way I made every significant decision, completely, finally, without revisiting it. I was not going to let the accident define my professional identity. So I went back to work as fast as I could. I worked as hard as I had before. Harder, because I needed to demonstrate that the interruption was over. And I drove everyone around me as hard as I drove myself, and I kept the world at exactly the distance where nobody could get close enough to see something they could use. A pause. And I fired 3 drivers because they looked at me with their eyes doing something I couldn't permit. What kind of something? Cole said. Pity, she said flatly, or worse, inspiration. Both of them do the same thing. They make me into a category. A narrative. Something that isn't the person I actually am. Cole kept his eyes on the road. He understood this. He understood it not abstractly, but from the inside. From 3 years of being someone whose wife had died young, and who had therefore been sorted into a category by people who needed categories to manage their discomfort. I know what that is, he said. She waited. My wife died 3 years ago, he said. My daughter was 4. It was the first time he'd said it plainly to Diana. He'd mentioned Lily, mentioned being her only parent, but not this. Cancer, fast at the end. After Rachel died, people had two ways of looking at me. Either I was someone who might fall apart, which made them careful around me in a way that was about their own anxiety, not mine. Or I was someone admirable for continuing, which was really just their relief that I wasn't falling apart dressed up as a compliment. He paused. I just wanted to get my daughter to school on time. Make sure she had what she needed. That was the whole job. A silence. The sparrow, Diana said quietly. On your dashboard. She gave it to me. Diana didn't say anything for a moment. Cole could feel her holding it, not the information, which was straightforward, but the weight of being allowed to know it. I have sensation, she said, very quietly. Not looking at him. In my left leg. Partial, it started about 6 weeks ago. I haven't told my doctor. I haven't told anyone. She paused. I don't know what it means. I'm afraid to find out because I'm afraid that knowing will require me to hope, and I don't know yet if I can manage hoping for something this specific. Cole held the information with both hands, carefully. You should tell your doctor, he said. I know. But take your time, he said. You'll know when you're ready. She was quiet for a long moment. Same time tomorrow, she said. Same time tomorrow. The setback came 3 weeks later, and it came fast, the way these things did when someone had been planning it. Cole arrived at the building at 7:30 on a Thursday morning and found an email from the staffing agency waiting. Received 7:03 a.m. subject, assignment update. He read it twice. Effective immediately, his assignment with Marsh Digital had been terminated. Client request, logistical restructuring, final payment within 2 business days. Thank you for your professionalism. Brief, clean, final. He sat in the SUV in the parking garage and thought about Richard Vance's knuckle on the window. About the word no he had given him 3 weeks earlier. He thought about the carefully assembled case that Vance had been building for months, and about how removing the one person Diana had let inside her defenses was exactly the move a person would make if they wanted to demonstrate that she was isolated, and that the isolation was by their design, not hers. He drove home. He called Mrs. Patterson to confirm she could cover the following week. He updated his resume. He called 2 former construction contacts. He sat at his kitchen table while Lily was at school and thought through the geometry of his options with the systematic calm he brought to difficult logistical problems, which this was, among other things. He had approximately 3 weeks of cushion, maybe 4 if he managed carefully. He did not call Diana. It wasn't his place. If she knew and wanted to do something, she would. If she didn't know, if Vance had managed the termination above or around her, then the answer would come, or it wouldn't, and that answer would tell him something he needed to know. He moved the Sparrow from the agency car to the kitchen table. He sat across from it and thought about what next looked like, and didn't let himself get ahead of the thinking. Lily came home from school at 3:15 and saw him in street clothes at the kitchen table. No driving today? Looking for next steps, he said. She considered this. Was the lady hard to drive for? No, he said honestly. She wasn't. Lily looked at him for a moment with the assessment she used when she was checking whether the surface answer and the real answer were the same thing. Then she went to her room to do homework. The phone rang the next morning at 9:20. He answered on the second ring. Diana Marsh said, I found out an hour ago. Her voice was controlled. Controlled the way it was when the control was costing her something to maintain. He processed it through a board-level contract review he ran last week. He had the technical authority to reclassify personal staff contracts without my direct sign-off. It's being reversed. By end of day today. Cole said. How did he frame it? Efficiency restructuring. A review of personal driver services across senior leadership. A pause. He also, apparently, reclassified 2 other personal service contracts. But mine was the one he moved first. He needed to send a message, Cole said. Yes, a longer pause. And he needed to remove someone I had come to trust before the board meeting next month. Because a person I trusted is a resource he couldn't control, and resources he can't control are problems. She paused. I want you to know that I understand what he was doing. And I want to ask whether you want to come back. It wasn't quite a question. She didn't have the full vocabulary for asking things that exposed her to the possibility of no. But it was honest, which was its own form of asking. I want to understand something first, he said. Ask, is there anything you need from me for the board meeting? Beyond driving? A pause. A different kind of pause, not defensive, but considering. Possibly, she said. Then yes, he said. I'll be there at 7:45. A beat of silence that was not empty. Thank you, she said. He put the phone down. He moved the Sparrow back to the car. He texted Mrs. Patterson that he wouldn't need the extra coverage after all. Then he made 2 cups of coffee and thought about what building something looked like when you did it alongside the right person. He returned the following Monday. Deanna was in the lobby rather than coming through the building's standard route, the first time she'd changed that protocol. Neither of them acknowledged it. He drove. She worked on her laptop. The temperature of the silence was the same as it had always been, and also nothing like what it had been before, and both of those things were true simultaneously. The board meeting was 6 weeks out. She told him this on the Wednesday PT clinic trip, matter-of-factly. The way she described logistical challenges, here are the parameters, here is the timeline, here is what it will require to succeed. What does success look like? He asked. Vance's proposal fails to receive board support. His access to personnel and contract decisions is formally reduced. The board's confidence in my judgment is publicly reaffirmed. She paused. What would help is a substantive, external record of performance, something the board can point to that wasn't curated by anyone in Vance's orbit. Client testimonials. An independent performance audit. Documentation of what this company has actually built over 8 years and what its leadership has produced. How many of your clients are public companies? She glanced at him. 38. How many of them have gone on record publicly about the value of your infrastructure work in a formal, documented capacity? She thought about it. Perhaps 15. On their own terms, not solicited. Would more of them do it if asked? Most of them, she said slowly. But getting them to do it quickly, in a coordinated way, with the documentation structured for a board presentation, that's an outreach and coordination effort that my communications team doesn't currently have capacity for. Vance moved 2 of my communications staff onto other projects 3 weeks ago. He said, I spent 7 years building communication strategies for construction projects in the 8-figure range. Stakeholder outreach, documentation structure, narrative frameworks for board and investor presentations. I know how to build that kind of campaign in a short window. She looked at the back of his headrest. On my own time, he said. Not as your driver, as someone who wants to help. Why? She said. Not suspicious. Genuinely asking. Because what he's doing isn't a business disagreement. It's using your situation as a weapon. And I've spent 9 years in construction learning that the right way to do something matters even when the wrong way is faster. He paused. Also because you hired me back. A long silence. Pull over, she said. He pulled to the curb on a quiet street in Clintonville. She leaned forward. If I accept your help, I need it to be because you think this is right. Not because you feel sorry for me. He looked at her directly. I've never felt sorry for you, he said. I think you built something real and someone is trying to take it from you using a method that has nothing to do with the work. That makes me want to help for the same reason I refused to report to Vance in the parking garage. Because it's wrong. And I don't do things that are wrong if I can do something else instead. She held his gaze for 4 seconds. 5. Then she sat back. Come to the office Thursday evening, she said. After the last pickup. We'll start then. They worked 3 Thursday evenings and 2 Saturday mornings over the next 5 weeks. Cole brought his organizational system, the one he'd developed over 7 years managing construction timelines. A hybrid of project management software and physical documentation that Rachel had called unnecessarily elaborate, and he'd called the minimum viable structure. Diana brought her knowledge of the board's psychology, the specific data points that carried weight with each member, the language that landed, and the language that slid off. They divided it cleanly. Cole built the architecture, the outreach sequence, the documentation structure, the timeline that would get everything in front of the board at exactly the right moment. Diana wrote the client outreach, the performance narrative, and the governance section that documented Vance's pattern of behavior over 22 months. She had kept records, meticulous, dated, sourced, emails, meeting minutes, 2 recorded calls that the agency's standard quality assurance protocol had captured, and which, it turned out, included Vance's conversation with the staffing agency about reclassifying her driver contract. She had known about the recording before she'd reversed the termination. She had said nothing about it. She had simply reversed the termination and waited. Cole looked at the documentation the first Saturday morning he saw it laid out on her office table. "He didn't know you had this." "No," she said. "He thought he was building a case." "He was building a case," she said. "Just not the one he intended." Cole looked at her for a moment. There was something in the arrangement of her expression. Calm. Certain. The armor fully present but carrying underneath it something that was satisfaction in the cleanest sense of the word. The satisfaction of having done the thing correctly. "You've been preparing this for months," he said. "I've been preparing it since the day he came to my office with the restructuring proposal," she said. "I knew what it was. I've been waiting for him to move far enough that the documentation would be complete." He thought about the sparrow on the dashboard. He thought about patience as a form of strength. "Let's build the presentation," he said. They called it groundwork. 42 pages. 19 public company client testimonials, each one addressing a specific metric: uptime improvement, cost reduction, scalability delivered, system reliability during high-demand periods. A third-party performance audit that documented 8 years of Marsh Digital's growth against sector benchmarks. A governance review that documented Vance's pattern of behavior without editorializing. Just dates, actions, documented outcomes. The record speaking for itself. On the 5th week, 3 evenings before the board meeting, they finished the final page. Diana read through the last section twice. Then she closed the laptop. "This is very good," she said. "Yes," he said. She looked at him. Not the professional look. The look she used when she was being honest about something beyond her professional language. "I haven't built anything with someone since the early years," she said. "Since my co-founder and I were in the warehouse with 7 people, and a runway that would have made any reasonable person quit." She paused. "I'd forgotten what it felt like." Cole said nothing, but he heard it. Lily met Diana on a Saturday in November. Cole hadn't planned it as a significant meeting. Diana had a file that needed his printer, a logistics requirement, nothing ceremonial about it. She'd said she'd be brief. Lily was home, working on a large-scale project at the kitchen table that involved poster board and colored markers, and what appeared to be an extremely detailed diagram. He introduced them simply. "Lily, this is Diana." "Diana, this is Lily." Lily looked at Diana for a moment with the assessment she brought to new people: direct, unself-conscious, reaching a conclusion faster than most adults were comfortable with. "Is that hard?" she said, meaning the wheelchair. She said it the way she asked all her questions, without preamble, because preamble was a structure adults built to protect themselves from direct answers, and Lily had not yet decided she needed that protection. Cole, from across the room handling the printer, went still. Diana said some things. "Not everything. What's hardest?" "People who change their face when they see me." Lily thought about this with the seriousness it deserved. "Like pity?" she said. "Like pity," Diana said. Lily nodded. "My dad does that thing where his face doesn't change," she said. "When something actually matters to him, his face just stays normal. I think that means he actually means it." "I've noticed that," Diana said. Cole came back from the printer with the document and found them at the kitchen table with Lily's bird book open between them. Lily was explaining migration patterns with the focused intensity she brought to things she genuinely cared about, gesturing at diagrams, cross-referencing text with the precision of someone who had read the book 3 times and was now teaching from it. Diana was listening, not performing attention, not being politely patient, actually listening, with the quality of presence she brought to the things she meant to understand. Cole stood in the doorway and watched. "She's teaching me about navigation," Diana said, without looking up from the book. "I gathered," he said. "Did you know," Lily said, without ceremony, "that some birds fly at night? So predators can't see them as easily." She paused. "It means they have to navigate differently, by stars instead of landmarks. But they actually get better at it than the day flyers. They develop a kind of internal compass that works in conditions where everyone else is lost." She looked up from the book. "I think people can do that too. Find a different way that works better for them than the original way, even if it looks harder from outside." Silence. Cole looked at his daughter. She was looking at the book, but she wasn't reading it. She had said what she came to say. Diana was quiet for a long moment. "Yes," she said. "I think that's exactly right." Lily looked up then. The assessment again. Brief. Accurate. And then, with the matter-of-fact delivery she used for conclusions she was confident in, "You can come back," she said. "I'm reading this whole book, and there are a lot of things in here you should probably know." Diana looked at Cole. Something in her face was being very carefully held. "I'd like that very much," she said. Lily closed the book with the satisfaction of someone who had accomplished what she set out to accomplish, and went back to her diagram project. Cole watched her go. "She's extraordinary," Diana said quietly. "I know. She thinks before she speaks. And then she says the precise right thing. She always has," Cole said. "Even when she was 4. Even in the hospital." He paused. "She said to the nurse, the last nurse we spoke to about Rachel, the one who explained what palliative care would mean, she said, 'Will she know we're there?' And the nurse said yes. And Lily said, 'Then that's the part that matters.'" He stopped. "She was 4. Deanna was quiet. He sat at the table. "What are we doing?" he said. He meant it in the same way she had meant it on the day she'd asked him what he was doing helping her. Not about the groundwork project. Not about the board. She looked at him for a long time. "Something I haven't done in a very long time," she said. "I'm not sure I have all the words for it yet." "Neither do I," he said. "But I know it's real. And I know I'm not going to stop it." She held his gaze. The composure was still there, but what was underneath it was visible in the way it rarely was. Not as weakness. Not as something managed or contained. But as the actual thing. Plain and honest. "Neither am I," she said. He reached across the table and put his hand over hers. She looked at it. Then, at him, something moved across her face that wasn't quite a smile yet, but was getting there. From the next room, Lily's voice, "Gerald is a connector node in the community structure, not a central hub. There's a significant functional difference." Diana looked toward the doorway, and then back at Cole. The almost smile arrived fully. Not performed. Not managed. Just her face doing what faces do when something true happens to them. "Who's Gerald?" she said. "Ceramic Fox," Cole said. "He's been having a difficult social season." She laughed. Real. Unguarded. The kind that came from somewhere undefended. It changed everything it touched. He thought, "I am going to remember this." The board meeting was a Tuesday in early December. Cole drove Diana to the Marsh Digital building at 8:15. She was in a dark navy suit, her hair pulled back with the precision she saved for things that mattered completely. She was composed, but not closed. There was a quality to her composure that was different from the composure of the first weeks. Then, it had been a wall. Now, it was a choice. She was choosing to be steady. That was different. How do you feel? He asked. She looked at him in the rear view. Ready, she said. He pulled up to the entrance. He came around and had the rear door open. She moved to the ramp. Then she paused. Vance has photographs, she said, from the community stakeholder event last month. He's going to use them as evidence that I've allowed personal relationships to compromise my professional judgment. Cole considered this. What are you going to say? She looked at him directly. That my relationship with my driver has been professional and appropriate in every respect. That Richard Vance spent 3 months attempting to surveil and exploit that relationship for his own purposes. And that the documentation of those attempts is in the appendix of the presentation on page 38. She paused, including the recording of the call he made to the staffing agency. Cole felt something settle. He handed you the evidence. He handed me the evidence, she said. Every time he moved against something that was mine, he created a record of it. She paused. That's what happens when someone underestimates you long enough. They get careless. She held his gaze for a beat. Thank you, she said, for the presentation, for the outreach, for staying when he tried to make you leave. She paused, for coming back. He held her gaze. Go build your case, he said. She went through the lobby doors. Cole drove to a parking spot a half block away and sat. He'd brought Lily's bird book from the back seat. It had lived there for 2 weeks, waiting to be returned. He opened it to the page about night-flying birds, the ones who navigated by stars instead of landmarks, who found a different method and got better at it than the ones who never had to. He sat with it for 4 hours. The text at 12:43 p.m. Read, still here. 1 more hour. He drove to the building at 10:05 and parked in the loading zone. He watched the lobby doors. She came through at 1:19 p.m., moving quickly, with the particular energy of someone who had used everything they had and was now ready to stop performing. He had the door open before she reached the vehicle. She got in. He closed the door. Got in the driver's seat. He waited. The proposal was tabled, she said. Permanently, the board also requested Vance's immediate resignation. A pause. It was not a close vote. Cole was quiet. The recording from the agency call, she said. That was the thing. The board could read the pattern in the documentation. But the recording was direct. It was his voice. And it was clear. And there was no version of it that could be reframed. She paused. He didn't say anything when it was played. He just looked at the table. Cole looked at her in the rear view. 19 client testimonials, she said. An independent audit. 22 months of documented governance behavior. And 1 recording of a board member soliciting my driver for insider information. She exhaled. It was very thorough. You were very thorough, he said. She looked out the window at the Columbus December. The flat white sky. The city going about its Tuesday. He reached forward and picked up the carved sparrow from the dashboard. He held it for a moment. Then he reached back and placed it in her hands. She held it the way you held something you understood the value of, with both hands, carefully, as though weight were a form of respect. She'd have liked you, he said. Rachel. She liked people who didn't quit. Deanna was quiet for a long time. When she looked up, her face was not composed. It was just open. She raised someone remarkable, she said. Lily raised herself, he said. I just showed up every day. That's the whole job, Diana said. And she meant it for Rachel, and for him, and for something larger than both. She held the sparrow for another moment. Then she placed it carefully back on the dashboard. I told my doctor about the sensation, she said. On Friday morning. He was completely still. She wants to run imaging, an assessment with a specialist. She paused. She was careful about how she put it. She said potential for rehabilitation progresses, and she said she wouldn't make any promises. But she said the injury profile was consistent with cases where partial sensation return had preceded measurable functional improvement. She looked at her hands. She said potential. That's enough, Cole said. That's what she said too. A pause. I've been afraid to hope for this. I know. You told me I'd know when it was time. You did know. She looked at him. Not the professional look, not the measured look. Just her. I stood up today, she said. In the meeting. Not physically. But I said what was true. The full truth. About my company. About my board. About what Vance had done. And about what I had built and who had helped me build it. I said all of it without minimizing any of it. Without performing a version of it that was easier for the room. She paused. It was the first time in 2 years that I have felt completely like myself in front of a room full of people looking at me. He held her gaze. Where would you like to go? He said. She looked out the window. The December afternoon. Pale and cold. Home first, she said. And then dinner with you and Lily. I want to tell her about today. She'll want a detailed accounting, he said. She follows these things. I know, Diana said. And the smile arrived again. Full, unguarded, changing everything. That's exactly why I want to tell her. He drove her home. He drove himself home. He made pasta, Lily's preferred meal for occasions that deserve something good and uncomplicated. He texted Diana the time. She arrived at 6:15 with sparkling water and the news. Delivered by Lily from next door. That Admiral had somehow gotten into the apartment building's laundry room, which was a separate development that nobody could fully explain. They ate. Lily listened to the full accounting of the board meeting with the focused seriousness of a person who had been tracking this situation for weeks and wanted the complete picture. Diana gave it to her honestly, including the parts that had been hard, including the recording, including the vote count. So he's gone, Lily said. As of today. Lily considered this with the weight it deserved. Good, she said. Not triumphant. Just clear. The way right outcomes deserve to be named. Then, and you told your doctor about your leg? Diana looked at her. Yes, and she said, maybe, she said potential. Lily nodded, slowly, processing. Then, maybe is still something, she said. Maybe is actually a lot, if you let it be. Cole looked at his daughter across the kitchen table in the light of an ordinary Tuesday that had turned out to be not ordinary at all. Yes, Diana said quietly. It is. After dinner, Lily went to her room. Cole and Diana sat at the kitchen table in the comfortable quiet of people who had survived something together and were still present on the other side of it. He reached across the table and put his hand over hers. She looked at it, then at him. I don't know exactly what this is, he said. But I know it's real. And I know I don't want to stop it. She held his gaze. Neither do I, she said. Not a declaration. Not a performance. Just the truth, said plainly, by someone who was learning that plain truth was not as dangerous as she'd believed. Behind him, the sparrow sat on the counter in the kitchen light. He had not needed to carry it today. He noticed that, without comment. It was still there. It would always be there, but the grip had loosened. The way grips did when the hands finally had somewhere to rest. This is not a story about rescue. It would be simple to frame it that way. A woman at the edge of what she could carry alone. A man who stayed when staying was harder than leaving. A child who said the right thing at the right moment, which children do sometimes, because children see the true shape of things before the adults around them have developed enough protective distance to look away. But rescue is the wrong word for what happened on the roads of Columbus between November and December of that year. And using it would be dishonest about what both of them actually did. Rescue requires the person being saved to have stopped moving. Diana Marsh was never not moving. She was defended. Heavily, expensively defended, in the way people become defended when they have learned that the wrong kind of openness costs more than they can afford to pay. And what Cole offered was not a way out of the cost. He had no way out to offer. He had $17 and a daughter, and a job he needed as badly as she needed a driver. What he offered was simply the refusal to treat her difficulty as the most important thing about her. To treat her as a person doing a job. From a person doing a job. Nothing more and nothing less. That was the thing. The small thing. The specific refusal. The thing that turned out to be everything. And Cole was not saved by Diana either. He was already surviving. He had been surviving for 3 years with the competence and the stubbornness of someone who understood that his daughter needed him to still be standing when she woke up in the morning, and that was the only reason he needed. What Diana gave him was not a rescue from loneliness. It was witness. The experience of being seen clearly and completely by someone who was not cataloging his grief or his endurance or his singleness, but simply registering him, the whole of him, the man, the father, the person, and finding that what they saw was worth staying for. Lily gave them both something neither had thought to ask for. She gave them the habit of honesty, the particular courage of a 7-year-old who had grown up understanding, without needing it explained, that people left, finally, permanently, without warning, and had made a specific peace with that understanding that was not the peace of resignation, but the peace of precision. You cannot stop people from leaving. But you can be very clear about what you are asking of them, and you can notice when they show up again and again in the ways that matter, and you can call that what it is. You can come back, Lily told Diana. And Diana did. Every time. The carved working sparrow stayed on the shelf in the living room after December. Not on the dashboard, on the shelf, beside Lily's bird book and a photograph someone had taken the previous spring of 3 people at a kitchen table, where the pasta had gone cold, because something had been said that made everyone laugh, and nobody had wanted to interrupt it to serve the food. Cole did not take the sparrow to the car anymore. He did not need to hold it as tightly as before. It was still there. It would always be there. But it had done what it was meant to do. Kept him company in the years when company was the most he could ask for. And now there was a table. And people around it. And that was its own kind of keeping. This is a story about the people who choose to stay. The ones who drive through the same rain every morning and do not require thanks for the consistency. Who build the presentation when it needs building, and refuse the money when refusal is what integrity requires. Who ask hard questions without making the answer into their own story. Who come back after the setback, not because the outcome is guaranteed, but because leaving would be a different kind of loss. The loss of the thing you were becoming inside the staying. Showing up is not a small act. It is, in the end, the whole act. The whole of what we can offer each other in the days when the other options have run out. Just the continued presence. Just the drive through the rain. Just the hand on the table and the truth said plainly and the question, not asked, but answered, every day, by still being here. The table holds. Not because it is perfect. Not because anyone around it is certain of what comes next, but because everyone at it chose to pull up their chair, and keeps choosing it, and has learned what that choice is worth. That was the whole of it. That was also everything.